And we're about out of time. I just wanted to ask one final question, and I start with you, Councilman Williams. Again, you are vying to be the council speaker, and as you all know, each individual council member has a lot of leeway about the projects that go forward in their own districts. And if you could talk about that dynamic and whether you might change that at all. Are there any disadvantages to that dynamic, any advantages? And I'd be interested in hearing from the rest of the panel as well.
Right before that, I did want to say that there's one thing I'm hoping gets still focused more on the plan, which is infrastructure, which I think is the one thing that we may be missing in terms of putting a bunch of people in places without dealing with the transportation, the sewer system, the schools. We got to think about that a little bit better. This plan is definitely better than the way Koch did it, but we got to move a little bit further. What you're talking about is member deference, and I'm probably the one council person, one of a speaker that's going to answer this differently than the other 7, and that's because I still believe in just being honest with what we have to do. So one, I fundamentally believe in member deference. I want to make sure I put that out there. I think it is important. I think us as council members know our district more than anyone else, and people should defer to us on most issues. There comes a time when member deference is running afoul or running against what the body says that it wants to do. And we as a body have said repeatedly we want to get deep affordability in our projects, and we want to make sure projects move forward. But the member deference at times has prevented that from happening, and it continues the segregation of the city. So, for instance, Councilmember Barron is always going to get 100%, 40% affordable housing if she can. My guess is Councilmember Borelli will never have 100%, any 40% income bands. And so that member deference is keeping the segregated city, which again keeps us segregated schools, so on and so forth. My colleague is going to say there are times when we have to do it. He'll give some examples. But overall, we don't do it as much. We don't address this member deference question as much as we should in terms of the plan that we want to see move forward. How this council is moving that plan forward. I don't know that I have the answer for what that is. I do know it has to be a discussion. And so if I'm blessed to be speaker, I want to facilitate this discussion amongst my colleagues of how we make sure the member deference is not running afoul of what the body says it wants to do.
So here's the problem with member deference. The problem is that the members, of course, like member deference. Then you'll have projects where Jumani will say, oh, we should overrule you on this project. And some other council member will say, well, we agree with you, right? So it's a little bit complicated because there isn't clear consensus in terms of even, I certainly believe that in the council there are members who would say, well, you know, at some point member deference goes too far. Okay, great. What's that point? Can you articulate that for me? Can you give me 3 specific items, A, B, and C, when member deference goes too far? And the answer is no, nobody can tell you that. They know it when they see it. And so when there's a project they don't like, suddenly members will say, I'm voting against this project because I don't like this project, even though the local council member likes it. What I propose and what I've tried to do as chair of the Land Use Committee is to say that if you have a legitimate land use concern, then we should support your concern, right? And that's a very big difference than something that is not land use related. So when there is a legitimate land use concern, whether it deals with the bulk or the density or even the affordability, which are all tied into legitimate land use concerns, I think we should support the members. When, as we have seen, and quite frankly, we have 2 complicated situations that we're dealing with just this week. Bedford Armory hearing is today. Edwin's Place is going to be wrapped up one way or another this week. Like I said, I'm barred from speaking about it because they're live situations and we're negotiating both. But the reality is that these are complicated decisions, and I think that you just have to have a very clear precedent. It's great, in my view, to have member deference, and I think it's important because we have seen significant improvements in projects. And I go back to my earlier point, which is that the administration has a holistic view of the city. What works for the whole city may not work in one neighborhood. It is dangerous, in my view, to say, oh, we're going to disagree with this member, but not that member, and I like this project, I don't like that project. I think that whoever the next speaker is, the next council, needs to come up with some very clear standards. Otherwise, it's going to be even more confusing, right? Because what's going to happen is you're going to have member deference, except what? Except when the speaker's not in the mood, except when people don't like that council member, except when people disagree with that person. I think that's going to create even more chaos, quite frankly. At least right now, you know, you deal with a local council member, you get it done, yes, yes, no, no. The idea that somehow in a future council, we're going to have a situation where, okay, we agree with the member except when we don't. Why? I don't know. It depends on our mood. I think that's a very dangerous place to go.
Well, I'm glad you pointed at me when you said speaker. I appreciate that. But I do want to say it's an oversimplification because we can't say just because it's complicated, we shouldn't provide the leadership to have that discussion. And so what you described is very, very tiny amounts of time where people say, I disagree with this. And that means the body is not moving forward with what it says it wants to do in public. And so that discussion has to happen. Again, I agree that I don't have the answer, but ignoring is not the answer. I would say one way to help that would be to have a program like MIH, for say, have mandatory amounts of low-income affordability, so we wouldn't have to worry about the individual. But it doesn't, which is why I vote against it.
Jamani and I are going to take our show on the road. I just want to 2 points to Jamani's point. The first is, in just about every single hearing that we've had in the Land Use Committee in the last year, somebody has voted against a council member's project. Just about every single hearing that we've had. So we see that consistently across the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members who say, I don't care about your deference, I'm opposed to that. Quite frankly, Jamani Williams is one of those members who is frequently in that group of folks, and he has good reasons, I'm sure, for doing doing that. The second thing I will say, which I think is important, is that it's not good enough just to say we want to change it. It will be worse. Mark my words. It will be much worse if we have member deference with exceptions, because nobody will know what those exceptions are. It needs to be clearly articulated what the standard is, when we veer off of member deference, and when those changes happen. In my view, it should be based on land use rationale.
But I just want to say, just because members voted against it doesn't mean the project didn't go through. And two, after you have a person with good leadership to have a discussion, you will have those reasons and when and why.
I'd like to hear from the administration if.
Oh, sorry.
So we've talked.
They love member deference.
We've talked a lot about what doesn't go through, but I actually want to flip that conversation. In our fiscal year 2017, so last year's project, I think it's 2/3 of the housing projects that we did had some form of council involvement, right? They had capital funds that were put in by the council member. They needed a land use action. They needed a tax exemption, right? So actually we do work very collaboratively with the council, and we get a lot of things through and done, and we work together. So I do want to sort of put that out there as a baseline, right? This is not all controversy. The other thing that I would say is, for us, sort of the single biggest point of debate and discussion in terms of getting our projects through is the number of homeless units. I think that is something that we have a conversation about all the time, and we have made a couple of changes to our most common new construction term sheets over the last year that I think are really designed to address some of that. First of all, we put a homeless requirement in our mixed income project, right? So that the buildings that are going in, basically everything that we are doing in the new construction space is going to have some homeless units, right? So we are taking away the debate of, why this project and not that project. We are making it much more consistent across the board. The other thing that we have done is that we have staggered it so that there are strong incentives and in fact requirements to do both the homeless units and some extremely low, very low income units, so that whereas in the past we might have had a competition essentially between the homeless units and the home units for the very low income families who happen not to have spent the previous night in the shelter, now we are doing both. And I think that is neutralizing some of the concerns that we have heard. So I think by doing, we work very closely with the council. We have tried to address the concerns that we've heard, right? So not to say that there won't be controversy, but by being responsive, hopefully we can address some of these issues.